Lisa wants me gone, but I'm a cop." The sun cast a warm golden glow across my front porch as I took a slow sip of coffee, breathing in the crisp morning air. My home, a historical beauty standing tall for over a century, had been my dream ever since I first laid eyes on it. With its deep blue exterior, intricate wooden carvings, and the massive oak tree anchoring the front yard, it was a masterpiece of old-world charm. I had barely finished unpacking when I noticed something that told me my peaceful new life might not be so peaceful after all. Lisa Matthews, the self-proclaimed ruler of the Homeowners Association, was power-walking down the street, her blonde bob perfectly in place, her designer sunglasses perched on her nose. In her manicured hand was a thick envelope, and I already knew what it contained. She strode up to my mailbox, slipped it inside, and took a long look at my home. Her lips pursed as she scanned my house, my lawn, my towering oak tree, and then finally my driveway, where my car was parked slightly askew from the standardized position her kind probably preferred. She lingered for a moment, then pulled out her phone and snapped a few pictures before heading back to her pristine beige McMansion. I sighed. I had seen this before. HOA leaders who mistook control for leadership, authority for ownership. They were the same in every upper-middle-class neighborhood, and they always believed they were untouchable. They liked uniformity, rules that benefited their clique, and absolute compliance. What they didn't know, what none of these people knew, was that I was a cop, a black cop, no less. And I had spent my entire career dealing with people who thought they had the right to dictate how others lived. I walked to the mailbox, retrieved the envelope, and opened it at my kitchen counter. Just as expected, it was a mandatory invitation to join the HOA, along with a list of so-called neighborhood improvement modifications. The first line alone made me scoff. $5,000 upfront membership fee, plus $350 in monthly dues. That was robbery disguised as organization, but it got worse. The document listed specific, required changes that I had to make to my property. First, I had to repaint my house a bland, HOA-approved beige. My deep blue exterior, which added character and history to the home, was apparently unacceptable. Second, I needed to remove my century-old oak tree because it was considered an obstruction that lowered the aesthetic harmony of the street. It was the largest tree in the entire neighborhood, its sprawling branches providing shade and history, but according to Lisa, it was not in line with HOA landscape guidelines. And finally, they had a strict parking rule. No vehicles could be parked in the driveway or in front of the house for more than 2 hours. Considering I worked long shifts and often returned home exhausted, this was nothing short of ridiculous. It was clear what this was. They didn't want me here. That evening, I took a deep breath, grabbed the envelope, and walked down the street to Lisa's house. Her place was a cookie-cutter mansion, identical to the others on the block. The lawn was so meticulously maintained that I wouldn't be surprised if she measured each blade of grass. A large Neighborhood Watch Captain sign was planted in her front yard, as if she were some kind of law enforcement authority. I rang the doorbell and it chimed an instrumental version of "We Are the Champions." I nearly laughed out loud. Lisa opened the door, flashing the kind of wide, practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was wearing a silk blouse and a neatly pressed pencil skirt, and I could see the glint of her HOA badge pinned to her chest, as if she were the mayor of this street. "Ah, our newest resident," she chirped. "I was just about to follow up on that letter. I assume you've read through everything?" I nodded, holding up the envelope. "I have, and I'll have to decline." Lisa's smile barely faltered, but I caught the slight twitch at the corner of her mouth. "Oh, I think there's a little misunderstanding. The HOA has already been officially registered for this area, and all homes are required to comply." I crossed my arms. "Actually, that's not true. My property isn't part of any HOA. My deed predates the establishment of this association, which means I'm not obligated to join. Legally, you can't enforce these rules on me." For the first time, Lisa's polished, friendly mask slipped. Her blue eyes darkened as she stepped forward, lowering her voice. "Look, I don't think you understand how things work around here. This neighborhood is undergoing improvements, progress. And progress doesn't always wait for people who refuse to fit in. It would be a shame if certain issues started arising for you." I tilted my head, my cop instincts immediately kicking in. "Are you threatening me, Lisa?" She let out a dry laugh, stepping back as she quickly readopted her fake friendliness. "Oh, of course not. I'm just looking out for the safety of our neighborhood. You know, older homes like yours, electrical issues, structural weaknesses, plumbing concerns. Anything could happen." Behind her, I noticed a shadow in the window. Her husband, a tall man with a square jaw, standing just out of sight, watching our exchange. His hand was resting on his phone, fingers poised over the screen. I'd seen that stance before. He was ready to escalate things if needed. I forced a smile. "I'll keep that in mind. Thanks for the concern." As I turned and walked away, Lisa's voice rang out behind me. "You have 1 week to reconsider. After that, the HOA board will discuss enforcement options." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just going to be a petty HOA dispute. Lisa had an entire group behind her, and they had already decided that I didn't belong. As I walked back to my house, I could feel eyes watching me from behind curtains, peeking from half-closed blinds. Some of them were probably just curious. Others? They were taking sides. That night, I took action. I installed high-definition security cameras around my property, making sure to document every inch of my home and lawn in its current condition. I had learned long ago to trust my instincts, and right now, they were screaming at me that Lisa Matthews wasn't done. She was just getting started. What she didn't know was that I wasn't an easy target. And if she was planning to make me regret moving here, she had no idea just how wrong she was. I woke up the next morning to the sound of murmuring voices outside my window. Pulling back the curtain, I wasn't surprised to see Lisa and a small group of HOA members standing on my lawn, clipboards in hand, pointing and whispering as they took notes. My gut told me this wasn't a friendly welcome committee. I took a deep breath, threw on a hoodie, and stepped outside, coffee in hand, deliberately taking my time as I walked down my porch steps. The air was thick with that artificial cheerfulness people like Lisa wore as armor. "Oh, good morning," she greeted, her voice dripping with condescension. "Just doing our routine neighborhood inspection. We have to ensure that every property maintains its curb appeal, of course." One of her minions, a short woman with graying hair, pointed at my lawn. "Your grass is at least 3 inches too tall according to HOA guidelines." I let out a short laugh. "I'm not in your HOA." Lisa's expression barely flickered. "Oh, but we're responsible for keeping the neighborhood beautiful for everyone. It's in everyone's best interest to comply with the rules, wouldn't you agree?" I stared at her, unblinking. "Not when those rules don't apply to me." That was the beginning of the real harassment. At first, it was minor inconveniences. Violation notices taped to my front door every morning, claiming I was in breach of non-existent HOA regulations. I ignored them. Then, the streetlight in front of my house mysteriously stopped working, making my home the only dark spot on the entire street at night. I reported it to the city, but it never got fixed. Next, my security cameras were suddenly disconnected, an eerie discovery that made my stomach tighten. Then things escalated. I woke up one morning to find my lawn covered in dead patches, as if something had been poured over it to kill the grass. Later that week, my garbage bins disappeared, only to turn up a block away in front of someone else's house with a note saying I was in violation of trash disposal regulations. Someone even went so far as to leave a pile of dog feces on my doorstep. A childish but effective message. I wasn't welcome. It wasn't just property damage. It was psychological warfare. They wanted me exhausted. They wanted me to feel surrounded. The final straw came when I stepped outside one night and found Lisa's husband standing near my driveway, staring at my house, his phone held up as if he was taking pictures. When I approached, he didn't move, didn't flinch. He just smiled, just checking for safety hazards. he said, voice calm and measured. You never know when something might need fixing. My jaw tightened. Get off my property. He lingered a moment too long before finally stepping back, raising his hands as if to say, I didn't do anything. I stood there until he disappeared into the darkness. I knew this wasn't random. It was calculated. Lisa was the mastermind, but she had backup. Neighbors who had bought into her vision, who believed they had the right to dictate who belonged and who didn't. And I knew exactly why I was being targeted. It wasn't just about my refusal to join the HOA. It was about me, about who I was. They wanted uniformity. I was different. That made me a problem. But if they thought I was just going to roll over and let them win, they had no idea who they were dealing with. That night, I reinforced my security system, replacing my cameras with hidden ones this time, ones they wouldn't be able to see or disable. I also installed motion-activated floodlights around my property and set up a backup generator in case the power accidentally went out. More importantly, I started documenting everything, every notice, every interaction, every single act of vandalism. A week later, I was woken up at 2 a.m. by the sound of laughter and hushed voices. My heart pounded as I reached for my phone and checked the security feed. My stomach clenched. Lisa and 2 HOA members were spray painting "Get Out" in bold red letters across my garage door. I had them. I grabbed my badge, slid my gun into its holster, and stepped outside. The second I flicked on the floodlights, they froze like deer caught in headlights. Lisa, her hand still gripping the spray can, turned slowly. The 2 men with her shifted uncomfortably. You think this is funny? I asked, holding up my phone, showing them the recording in real time. Because I just captured everything. Lisa barely hesitated before smoothing down her blouse and pasting on that same fake smile. Oh, officer, we were just... I held up a hand. Don't. Lie. I took a slow step forward, keeping my voice calm. Trespassing, vandalism, hate crime, I can book you for all 3 right now. One of the men took a step back, looking ready to bolt. Lisa's confidence wavered for the first time. I think you're overreacting. I flipped open my police badge, letting the light catch the engraving. Their faces drained of color. You're a cop? Lisa whispered. Yeah, I said, tucking my badge back into my pocket. And now I have enough evidence to press charges. Lisa's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. One of the men tried to speak, but I cut him off. You have exactly 10 seconds to get off my property before I call for backup. Lisa turned on her heel and marched away, her lackeys scurrying after her like frightened animals. As they disappeared into the night, I exhaled slowly. The next morning, I sent the footage to my precinct. I didn't even have to explain much. Lisa was arrested before noon. But that wasn't the best part. At the emergency HOA meeting that evening, I finally played my trump card. I stood in front of the neighborhood, a projector screen behind me displaying every act of harassment, every violation Lisa and her board had committed. The air in the room grew heavy as I laid it all out. Their fraudulent HOA funds, their coordinated harassment, the financial misconduct, even their connections to corrupt city officials. I watched as the people who had supported Lisa just a day ago slowly distanced themselves, their expressions shifting from loyalty to fear. By the time I was done speaking, Lisa was being escorted out in handcuffs. The HOA collapsed that night, and as I walked back to my house, feeling the weight of victory settling in, I took a deep breath and smiled. For the first time in weeks, they had tried to break me. Instead, I had broken them. The neighborhood had changed overnight. Where there had once been whispers behind closed curtains, now there were stolen glances, cautious nods, and a tension that hung thick in the air. Lisa's arrest had sent shockwaves through the community, dismantling the illusion of order she had carefully cultivated. But I knew better than to believe that this was over. A woman like Lisa didn't go down without a fight, and if there was one thing I had learned in my years on the force, it was that people like her always had contingency plans. I spent the next few days keeping a low profile, watching waiting. The HOA was crumbling, its members scrambling to distance themselves from the mess Lisa had created. Without their fearless leader, they were nothing more than a group of cowards pretending to care about neighborhood standards. But something didn't sit right with me. Lisa had been too calm during her arrest, too composed. It wasn't just arrogance, it was certainty. She knew something I didn't, and I had a gut feeling that she wasn't done trying to get rid of me. That feeling was confirmed 3 nights later when I woke up to the acrid scent of smoke. My instincts kicked in before my mind fully registered what was happening. I bolted upright, heart hammering, and sprinted toward the front door. Through the window, I saw the telltale glow of flames licking at the base of my oak tree, spreading rapidly toward my porch. Someone had set my property on fire. Without hesitation, I grabbed the fire extinguisher from the kitchen and rushed outside. The fire had already begun to climb, the heat licking at the wooden beams of my front steps. I aimed the extinguisher and sprayed, dousing the flames as best I could, but it was spreading too fast. I shouted for my neighbor to call 911, but I didn't stop working to put it out myself. By the time the fire department arrived, the flames had devoured the tree's lower branches, charred part of my fence, and left ugly black scorch marks along my porch railing. It could have been worse. If I had woken up just a few minutes later, my house would have been next. As the firefighters worked to ensure there were no lingering embers, I took a step back and surveyed the damage. My pulse was still racing, my hands gripping the empty extinguisher so tightly my knuckles had turned white. Someone had tried to burn me out of my home. This wasn't just about property disputes or HOA rules anymore. This was personal. A voice behind me made my blood run cold. Such a shame, Lisa's husband, Todd, said smoothly, stepping just close enough to be heard over the commotion. These old houses, they're like kindling. All it takes is one bad spark. He wasn't even trying to hide it. He was taunting me. I turned slowly, locking eyes with him. He had the smug expression of a man who thought he was untouchable, but there was something else there too. Something simmering just beneath the surface. A challenge. He wanted me to react, to lash out, to make a mistake. I didn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, I took a slow breath, my voice calm and measured when I finally spoke. Arson's a serious crime, Todd. His smirk didn't waver. Oh, of course, but accidents happen all the time, especially to people who don't belong. That was it. He had all but admitted it. My grip on the extinguisher tightened, but I forced myself to stay composed. I had him exactly where I wanted him. Over the next few days, I worked in silence. I filed reports, gathered evidence, and did what I did best. Watched. Todd thought he had won. He thought his message had been received loud and clear. What he didn't realize was that I had been building my case against him from the moment I moved in. Every violation, every act of vandalism, every threat, recorded, documented, time-stamped. The footage of Lisa spray painting my garage had been damning, but this was enough to bury them. It all came to a head at the next emergency community meeting, where the remnant of the HOA were trying and failing to regain control. I stood at the back of the room, silent, waiting. Lisa's seat at the head of the table was empty, but Todd was there, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place. His eyes met mine across the room and he smirked. That smirk vanished the moment I stepped forward and pulled out my phone. "Before we start," I said, my voice carrying across the room, "I think it's important that everyone sees what's really been happening in this neighborhood." I tapped the screen, and the projector behind me flickered to life. The room fell silent as footage from my hidden security cameras began playing. First, the vandalism. The poisoned lawn. The slashed tires. The trash left on my doorstep. Murmurs spread through the crowd as residents exchanged uneasy glances. Then, the fire. The footage of Todd lurking near my house just minutes before the flames started. The way he lingered, looked around, then disappeared into the darkness. His face was unmistakable. The room erupted into chaos. "You set his house on fire?" someone shouted. "This is a crime! This is arson!" Another voice cut in. Todd shot to his feet, his face pale, but I wasn't done. "And just in case anyone still has doubts," I said, playing the final clip. An audio recording from the night of the fire. Todd's voice, clear as day, taunting me. "These old houses, they're like kindling. All it takes is one bad spark." That was all it took. The next few minutes were a blur. Residents turned on Todd, shouting, pointing, demanding answers. The police arrived shortly after, my colleagues, men and women who had been waiting for my call. Todd tried to deny it, but the evidence was overwhelming. He was arrested on the spot. The last time I saw him, he was being led out in handcuffs, his face contorted in rage and disbelief. He had spent so long believing he was untouchable, so convinced of his own power, that he had never considered what might happen if someone fought back. And I had fought back. In the days that followed, the remnants of the HOA crumbled completely. Lisa, already facing charges, had no defenders left. The city launched an investigation into the association's fraudulent activities. Uncovering years of embezzlement, misconduct, and targeted harassment, the community, free from their reign, finally began to heal. I stood on my newly rebuilt porch a few weeks later, coffee in hand, watching as children played in the yards where Lisa and Todd had once patrolled like dictators. My oak tree, though scarred, still stood strong, its roots deep, unshaken. The neighborhood felt different now. Lighter, freer. One of my neighbors, an older woman who had kept her head down throughout the ordeal, approached hesitantly. "We should have spoken up sooner," she said softly. "We should have done more." I offered her a small smile. "You're doing something now," I said, glancing around at the changes taking place. "That's what matters." She nodded, and for the first time since moving here, I felt a sense of true community. Lisa and Todd had tried to force me out. They had wanted me gone, erased, replaced. But in the end, they were the ones who lost everything. And me? I was exactly where I belonged.